Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thank you so much for joining us. And this week, never have so many been so anxious to see a hypothetical curve flatten. So tonight, we're going to look at how that is progressing in this continuing battle against COVID-19. We'll also look at the active roles of governors around the country and how Louisiana's governor is doing. And we'll take a detailed look at past virus attacks and what we've learned from them. All of this, plus the latest on the Hard Rock demolition, are on the agenda for tonight's Informed Sources. And joining us in their remote locations are Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, John Barry, who is the author of the acclaimed book about the 1918 influenza outbreak, The Great Influenza, the epic story of the deadliest plague in history, and also Gordon Russell, who is the managing editor of investigations for the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go with Gordon first. Things are just moving along so quickly. I mean, what is now the status for us here in our New Orleans region in terms of cases, deaths? Are we beginning to see a flattening of the curve?
I think it's too early to say that. We did a story earlier this week suggesting there might be some signs of a flattening, and I think we spoke too soon. There were several days in which the number of new cases were trending downwards, and there are some other encouraging signs that people have pointed to. There's a little bit less demand at the drive-through testing centers, which is frankly a better metric of what's happening today than some of the testing itself is. What we've come to learn about the testing is that it takes a long time, especially these commercial tests. Some of the commercial tests are taking 7 to 10 days to process. And it's a cause of frustration for the city and for the government, as well as, of course, the people who are waiting to find out if they have the coronavirus. And when you add it all up, there's a tremendous amount of lag between when you might have a positive test result and when you actually contracted the virus, because the virus takes a few days generally incubating in your system when you're not showing any symptoms. Then you have a second period where they say you're shedding virus and you're very contagious at that point, and that lasts a few days. You may not be feeling bad, and then there's a period where you start to feel bad, and that's when you might go get a test. And that whole process might take 10 days, and then if you're waiting another 7 days for a test result, you're talking about a lag of like 17 days potentially, or even longer possibly. So the effect of all that is that the results we're getting right now, which are very alarming, we've had thousands of new positive results in the last few days in the state's over 10,000 known cases now. It is alarming for sure, but it also is reflective partly of conditions a couple of weeks ago, and it's still too early to say exactly what these social distancing measures are having. There's some other evidence out there. I mean, the New York Times did an interesting graphic where they analyzed people's movements using their data from their phones and stuff, which seemed to show that these stay-at-home orders were having some impact here. And compared to places that didn't have such orders, we were doing better than some of those. Everything you look at, though, has some asterisks, like who has phones and where the data is coming from and what people are doing when they're moving around. I mean, if they're getting in their car and driving somewhere, that's not really a problem. But if they're, moving around in groups of people, that is a problem.
Gordon, listening to the governor's press conference yesterday, in which he did a good job of spelling out that a lot of this data is from a few days ago. But he said to the mathematicians and the people who figure these things out that the really relevant numbers aren't as much the new cases, but the number of hospital beds filled and the number of people who've died.
Right. I mean, I guess in the end, the number of deaths is the thing that really matters, right? But again, the problem with all of these things is that they call them lagging indicators. I mean, a death typically, like I was saying, the test results might come 17 days after you get infected. Well, a death is likewise something that comes at the end of the process, and hospitalization precedes death, but maybe not by that much. So all of these things are things that are lagging. I think the governor's point is partly that, what they're focused on right now is how many hospital beds do they have? How many open hospital beds do they have? How many ventilators do they have? And how many people are expecting to be coming to those hospitals? And, he's been warning that we're going to run out of some of these things by next week.
So, Gordon, let me ask you, is there any possibility, does it look like we're going to be able to more consistently get test results in a quicker manner?
I don't know that we will. I mean, the officials I've been talking to say they've been pressuring these centers. I'm sure the big processors of these tests like LabCorp and Quest, I think, have been, flooded with these things, and that's probably the reason for the delay. I guess there could be some improvement as the demand maybe relaxes a little bit. They're also coming up with new tests. I mean, I think OSHA has been approved for a test that you can do right there and have your results right away, which would be a huge improvement, obviously, if they could shave 7 days off of that waiting period.
So let me ask you, where do we stand now, in terms of the country with confirmed cases and deaths?
So we have around 10,000 confirmed cases. I don't remember the exact number from today, but it's around 10,000, and we have 370 deaths statewide. And we have, very troublingly, some very high death rates in some of our local parishes. I mean, really all of them that have a lot of cases. Orleans, of big counties in the country, New Orleans Parish has the highest per capita death rate. St. John Parish actually has an even higher per capita death rate, but it's a small parish, and it's somewhat influenced by there's a nursing home for veterans there that's had 8 deaths, which accounts for some of the problem. But they've had 22 deaths, I'm told, by the coroner there, all told, in the parish. So, and the reason for that, we believe, is that we know it to be true that a lot of people here have underlying health conditions, and that's the most logical explanation for why we're seeing a higher death rate here. It could be issues with the healthcare system. There could be other things that people haven't figured out yet. But the most obvious answer is that a lot of people here have diabetes, hypertension, lung conditions, kidney conditions, and they've told us that actually out of all the people who have died, only 3%, I believe, is the number now that didn't have some underlying health condition.
Let's bring John into this conversation, because John, you've studied hard and wrote an incredible book about the 1918 influenza epidemic. What we're looking at right now with this COVID-19 and what happened in 1918, how does that compare? I mean, statistically, how bad was it, the 1918? How many people contracted it? How many people died?
Well, worldwide, an estimated 50 to 100 million people died, which, if you adjust for population, would be 225 to 450 million people today.
Wow.
So 1918 was a lot more lethal, fortunately. It was less contagious. It infected about a third of the world's population. In the United States, about 675,000 people died. Adjust for populations, equivalent to about 2 million today. The case mortality rate in the West was probably about 2%. It was much worse in the less developed world, not because medicine was any better here, but because those people had never seen an influenza virus before. They had no protection whatsoever. In the West, people had seen other influenza viruses, had some natural protection.
So what kind of did the country, was there also a stay-at-home order issued then? Did people sort of stay away, or did they go gather in the streets?
Well, essentially, almost every city in the country ended up closing schools, bars, and so forth and so on. They didn't issue the same broad-based stay-at-home orders that we have now. But effectively, it was very similar, because fear, caring for somebody who was sick or being sick yourself, the absenteeism in industries was astronomical. But in most cases, they did continue to open, other than anything that involved a crowd gathering. The key is, and this is what's important for Louisiana now, the places that waited until there were a lot of deaths before they instituted these various orders, it was too late, because by then the virus was widely disseminated in the community and those orders did not have a lot of effect. The places that instituted the orders early, before there were a lot of deaths, fared much better, certainly in terms of flattening the curve. So the healthcare system, they were all overwhelmed, but they could still struggle through. And in some cases, it may have affected the actual death toll in the end.
Because we see, we hear the story of like really the tale of two cities. It was with Philadelphia. They had a big, parade in support of World War I. We should note that this is while World War I was going on, and which really helped the spread of the virus. And then there was St. Louis, who held things together a little bit better, kept the rates down because they had people stay at home and not go to the streets.
Right.
So,
classic case, as you just said.
Yeah. So would you, in your estimation, taking a look at what happened in 1918 and what is happening today, are these the correct steps that are being taken?
Yeah, they are. The problem is compliance. If people comply with the advice, then you will definitely see benefit. Around the world, many countries have had significant success in getting ahead of the virus. Most of them are Asian, but Iceland is another one. We're far behind the curve because our testing is so delayed. It's been a debacle from the first. You can't isolate or self-quarantine a contact trace if you don't know who's sick.
John, how do these viruses come to an end? I mean, is there a time that they just play themselves out? I mean, there's nothing we can do to eradicate them.
No, the bad news is I think this virus is going to be with us forever. The good news is this is its first time around. No human's immune system has ever seen it before. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we're making progress on both therapeutic drugs and the vaccine. What I would expect to happen would be you would see multiple waves of this. We can't keep everybody locked down forever. We'll come back, go back to work, and it'll surge back up. The weather may change. We may get lucky in summer, and that could cause the virus to die down, but it's not going away. However, the second, third time around, our immune systems will be able to deal with it much better naturally. A year and a half, maybe less if we're lucky. I think there's a very good chance we'll have a good vaccine for this virus. Influenza is very difficult to make a vaccine for. You have to get one every year, but I think in this case, this virus is a little different. The target for the immune system is much more stable. So we'll probably be able to get a good vaccine. It's going to burn through the community eventually, whether it's half of the Americans get sick, maybe more. I doubt that it'll be much less than that. It is more contagious than influenza. Again, that flattening the curve. The most important numbers coming out of China is the death toll in Wuhan was 5.8%. The rest of China, it was 0.7%. And the difference was in Wuhan, the medical system was completely overwhelmed. The rest of China, they had ICU beds and ventilators for those who needed them.
So that's what the struggle is right now, making sure.
Should there be some sort of a...
Go ahead, E.
No, I was going to ask if there should be some sort of an international organization, I guess like a NATO of viruses or something, that some international organization charged with looking for these things and trying to preempt them.
Well, I mean, there is a surveillance system. WHO is in charge of it. They picked up 2 different bird flu viruses, actually more than 2, that were threats to become much more lethal pandemics, and these were H5N1 and H7N9. There is a lot of surveillance out there. This stuff has to be reported. China obviously was late in reporting this, as they had been in SARS, but not nearly as badly as in SARS. However, the Chinese scientific community has been, I think, very good, at least in getting the genome out immediately. Without that, we wouldn't have been able to do work on drugs and on vaccines. So that saved us a lot of time. That was up fairly early in January.
John, the pandemic in 2018, here we're going through this again. We're struggling now with supplies, PPE, protective personal equipment for our healthcare providers. What does this country have to do to really get prepared? I mean, it seems like it's something that we should really plan to happen. Hope that it doesn't, but we need to be planned for it to happen.
Well, I mean, the Bush administration started that effort. They passed a $7 billion bill, which included pandemic preparedness planning. You know, I was actually part of that early conceptualizing of a pandemic preparedness plan. You know, they also invested a lot of money in vaccine manufacturing technology. The ventilators that are stockpiled now were stockpiled because of that. But it all costs money. So Bush got excited over H5N1, which had 40, 50% mortality. If that had become easily transmissible to humans, you're talking about an incredible blow to humanity. You know, that threat sort of died away and the funding stream stopped, and public health agencies all over the country, practically every state, along with the federal investment, all of those things began to lapse, and we became less and less prepared.
So right now, it would seem that social distancing is just in order. We have to do that. And then also some sort of therapeutic approach. How close do you think we are to something like that? We know
that's impossible to say. I mean, we do know that it's dozens, literally dozens of possibilities are in trials right now or being tested. I think I may be wrong on the number, but I think I saw 89 different. May not be that high. You know, there are a couple of things that are really promising. There's remdesivir, and then there's the chloroquine. I don't know how rapidly they'd be able to be used and manufactured and distributed, assuming that they do prove effective. I would guess it would certainly be in a period of months.
Marcy, I'd like to yield the floor to Gordon, who's been trying to get in. Gordon?
I didn't hear you.
John, I was just going to ask you, my recollection is that the Spanish flu in 1918 flared up worse in the fall than in the spring, right? Is that a real peril this time?
Fortunately, I don't think so. In 1918, there was a very mild spring wave, very lethal fall wave, a third wave in the spring of 1919 that was lethal, but not nearly as bad as the second wave. But even in the first wave, even though it was generally mild, you could see plenty of little pockets of virulence and lethality that gave you a warning that that the influenza virus in 1918 had the potential to be really, really bad. And there has been no evidence any place in the world that this virus is going to do anything like that. Obviously, we are all very grateful for that.
Well, thank you for all of the information you shared with us, to share with media across the country and across the world, and for all the research you've done. All we can do is just, I guess, hope and pray that this thing will definitely just ultimately go away. But we have to help flatten that curve, don't we?
We do. And, you know, it's not going to end civilization. It's not the bubonic plague of the Middle Ages that wiped out a quarter of the population or a third of the population. We will get through this. We will recover. It is a hard time, obviously, for all of us.
All right, John, thanks so much. And Errol, now let me go over to you, because we really see governors in the lead. And our governor, John Bell Edwards, is certainly among them.
You know, this whole thing is an interesting study in government. We have what we call a federal government. What that means is that we have a strong central government and then some autonomous governments, which are our state governments. Remember, the United States, it wasn't the country that created the states, it was the states, 13 of them, that created the country. And that's why I call it the United States. But there's very few issues where we see so much interplay between the central government and the state government. Is this is an issue where you have the central government with the president and all 50 state governments and all 50 state governors. So I don't recall an issue that had that kind of cast of characters all involved. I remember back in the civil rights days, you had the southern governors, who were speaking out against the central government. But this is really a prime example of the federal system at work. Now, of course, the central government has the power, they have the money, and they have the law. But it's just an interesting case study. Also interesting, I think, has been John Bell Edwards. Watching him at these press conferences, this is a West Point guy, and he looks very much like the general who's in charge. I think he's been very knowledgeable. He has a good understanding of healthcare issues. But the other thing that's kind of refreshing about this is that there's no partisan division on this. There's no Republican side or conservative side or liberal side on this. It's everybody really together on this kind of issue. And so it's a different kind of politics than what we've usually seen.
Yeah, and he's definitely keeping the public up to date. And I know that's one thing, John, that I think that you really have emphasized, is that you got to be truthful with the public. You got to come out there and give them the facts.
Right. That is maybe the most important lesson from 1918. If you want society to hold together, if you want people to pay attention to what you say, you have to start out telling the truth. There was no Tony Fauci in 1918. And the result in a lot of places was real panic.
And you're seeing some examples around the world, just the opposite. Is it the president of Brazil, I believe?
Right, he's probably the worst in the world.
Yeah, who's denying that this is real. He says it's just a hoax. So, and the people know better.
Yeah, and the people want the answers. They want to have an idea of how to plan for the weeks ahead. Hopefully not the months ahead of this. Gordon, you know what? We're going to move over to a different topic now, because it's also a really important one here in the city of New Orleans, and that's the Hard Rock Hotel, and the collapse of it and the different efforts to try to demolish it. Now we see another plan, but it's an old plan that came back.
Yeah, I mean, there continues to be haggling over whether to implode it or to take it down piecemeal, and seems to be sort of at an impasse. And this would be a great time, obviously, to get it cleared when there's not much else going on in the city. And we also saw this week the release of the long-awaited OSHA report, which was very damning and really points the finger at the structural engineer more than anyone else, but points to a lot of design flaws with this building, and even kind of hints at criminal charges. I think when you see terms like willful being thrown around, I think a lot of people get nervous.
Yeah, I would, and of course the engineering firm has said, we just absolutely do not agree. We've done outstanding work, all around the region, and this is just not true. So this is just the first phase of the OSHA reports, right?
Yeah, I think this is the big one, but there, where it goes from here. I mean, OSHA, I think, by law has to do this within 6 months, and that 6 month period was coming up, or maybe did come up. It's been 6 months now since the building collapsed, or five months and change.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there's more OSHA reports expected, but I would imagine this OSHA report is being looked at by a lot of lawyers around town, both people preparing, civil suits and wrongful death suits and that kind of thing, and also probably being looked at by prosecutors, both state and possibly federal prosecutors.
So going back to the demolition, Errol, did you have a question?
No, I was going to ask if there's anything about the current situation with the virus that would prevent the demolition. Like if we get to the point, if this is still going on, can someone say, well, look, how can you tear down a building and have proper social distance? So, I mean, could the two become part of the same issue?
I suppose it's possible. I mean, the flip side is I would think in a way it's a good time to do something like this when you have that part of the city basically devoid of people. But I don't know enough about the particulars about how the demolition would be carried out. And, perhaps this may also relate to whether it's an implosion or not. But I'm sure that workers could be outfitted with all kinds of hazmat type gear. But I suppose it's a potential issue, but it would seem to me that it's a good time to deal with it.
So quickly, Gordon, the new plan from the developers is to do the piecemeal, bit by bit demolition as opposed to implosion. How's the city feel about this?
Well, I think the city prefers implosion. I mean, I think some of this just has to do with how long each method's going to take, and then there's an argument separately about whether the developers would be indemnified from any damage or anything that might result from an implosion, which is another concern of the development group, I think.
Okay, well, we'll see where that one goes. Right now, let's wrap up this conversation with the question. April 30th seems to be a target date now. The governor has extended the orders for basically, stay at home, businesses closed, et cetera. Where do you think we're going to be by April 30th?
I think hardly anybody believes that April 30 will be the end of this. People seem to be talking about the middle of May as a possibility, or maybe into June. But I think the important point is if by late April, if people are seeing progress, if they see that things are happening and they believe that we're on the winning side on this, I think people will feel better about it, and it'll be more palatable if it is extended.
John, what do you think?
I agree with Errol. There are ways, but it will still take time to get things moving again. If you get rapid testing, antibody testing, we start discovering that people have had the disease. They are probably immune to it. They are certainly safe to go back to work and to meet with the public. But we need a plan to do that. It needs to be a national plan. I guess the state could develop it on its own. It probably may not have the resources and technology and so forth, but it really needs to be a national plan. We do not have any national plan.
John, thank you. Gordon.
I mean, I think we're a long ways from this stuff being lifted too. And I guess I would say I don't have a prediction about when it might start to relax, but I think people also have to remember that we're all eager to see some progress from the social distancing. But once we achieve that, it doesn't mean that it still means people are getting sick and dying. It just means that we've peaked. And so it's not going to necessarily be a moment when we say, oh, great, we can all go outside and start going to restaurants again. There's going to be sort of a long come down from this, I think.
All right. Well, we'll see where it goes, where we all are by the end of this month. Thanks, guys, so much for joining us, everybody in your various remote locations. Thanks so much, John, for taking the time to be with us. I know you had a lot of interviews and appearances before you. And Gordon, of course, thank you so much for all your hard work. And thank you guys for joining us too. We really appreciate it. And we will continue to be bringing you informed sources every week, broadcast and online. We'll see you again next week on Informed Sources. Have a good evening.